Chapter 17.
Traumatic core beliefs, taking control. Quote, I had this moment where it occurred to me, I don't have to think like this. I can decide how I want to react. It might not seem like a big deal, but it was for me. End quote. Tom. The previous chapter offered an opportunity for you to develop an understanding of how you are affected by traumatic core beliefs, automatic negative thoughts, and the painful emotions that come along for the ride. But learning about how core beliefs affect you does not in itself help you respond to them. This chapter explores skills for managing or even healing core beliefs. Before going further, we need to offer a note of realism. Perhaps you recall our discussion of neuroception in the chapter called Childhood Harm and the Body. Neuroception explains how, at a subconscious level, our bodies continuously scan the environment, searching for signs of threat or safety. This helps us appreciate why a physical and emotional reaction is almost immediate when you get triggered. Learning about your core beliefs and developing skills to deal with them will unlikely prevent them from being triggered. So, what is critical is how you respond once a core belief and related emotions get triggered. We don't believe this should come across as pessimistic for a couple of reasons. First, over the past 60 years, talented clinicians such as Albert Ellis, Aaron Beck, Jeffrey Young, and many others have developed skillful ways of coping with core beliefs. Second, with time and dedicated practice, the triggering of core beliefs can begin to lose its hold over you. Problematic ways of coping with trauma-based core beliefs. Before exploring healthy skills for responding to core beliefs, we want to share some coping styles it's possible to fall into when core beliefs get triggered. Not only is it necessary to feel confident that you can respond skillfully when core beliefs get triggered, but it's useful to be aware of what can get in the way of your progress. There are 3 coping styles that can encourage core beliefs to remain stuck and powerful. In the 1920s, a psychologist named Alfred Adler identified coping styles referred to as avoidance and compensating, ideas that Aaron Beck and Jeffrey Young developed. The third means of coping, submitting, was developed most significantly by Jeffrey Young. Avoidance. Jason had been emotionally abused by his father and stepmother, and then bullied in school. These experiences formed the basis for 2 powerful core beliefs. People will harm me, and I am inadequate or unacceptable. At 22, Jason's main means of coping when these core beliefs get triggered is to avoid social situations. He doesn't work or attend school, only has a couple of online friends, and spends his days playing video games. Avoidance keeps his anxiety in check, but he isn't meeting his needs for belonging, self-esteem, self-expression, or meaning. Unmet needs on this level are the source of the chronic depression he experiences. But sometimes it's not just other people that are avoided. It's possible to feel a need to avoid painful feelings such as anger, depression, loneliness, and anxiety. Some individuals may avoid or numb such feelings with alcohol and drug abuse, self-harming, dangerous behaviors, unhealthy eating, other addictive behaviors, etc. Another expression of avoidance is to never ask for what you need, confront a person, or express yourself. Some individuals pay little attention to their needs and will not assert themselves. It's often a way of avoiding conflict or preventing others from leaving them. Submitting. Jeffrey Young discusses another means of coping when a core belief or schema gets triggered, which he calls submitting. Rather than avoiding, the individual just accepts the core belief. They see the core belief as true and accept all the negative automatic thoughts and painful emotions that go with it. Robert serves as a good example. He experienced all manner of abuse, neglect, and abandonment. Robert had been playing cards with the same four male friends for years. One evening he was telling a story, and before he could finish it, a friend said, "Hey, Robert, does this story have a punchline or at least an ending?" The other guys laughed. Robert made a face and went quiet, and they started playing cards. Had Robert not been badly abused and abandoned, he might have shrugged it off or found a way to assert himself. Instead, what happened was that core beliefs such as "I'm inadequate or unacceptable" and "people will neglect or abandon me" were triggered. All that evening, and for days following, Robert kept thinking, "I'm boring and have nothing interesting to say," or "they aren't really my friends and probably don't want me as part of the card group." These were automatic negative thoughts. He got quite depressed about it and felt rather lonely. Robert wasn't coping by avoiding people, places, or his feelings. Robert simply believed that his core beliefs and automatic thoughts were true, and his feelings made sense to him. He couldn't look at it in any other way. He was submitting to the core beliefs. Compensating. In a sense, compensating is the opposite of submitting. If I submit, I accept the core belief and related thoughts and feelings as true. I get rather immobilized by the core belief and thoughts. With compensating, I defend against the core belief by thinking or acting the opposite of what I really feel. Or I might push the issues or feelings onto someone else. If this seems confusing, here are some examples. If the core belief, "I'm inadequate or unacceptable," is triggered, I might project these feelings onto someone or something else. In other words, I might say, "It's not me that's bad or inadequate, it's you or the situation." Or perhaps I will compensate for feeling inadequate by bragging or embellishing accomplishments. If a core belief of "someone will harm me" is triggered, rather than just feeling scared and immobilized, that would be submitting, I might act tough, become threatening, or try to scare someone else. Imagine how a peacock or a blowfish compensates when they feel threatened. If a core belief of "life is unsafe and something bad will happen" is triggered, I might compensate by checking for threats obsessively or throwing myself into compulsive rituals. If a "people will neglect or abandon me" core belief is triggered, I might act distant, decide I don't care about this person, or even dump them before they can do it to me. With compensating, an individual often wants, unconsciously, for someone else to feel what they are feeling. In other words, they might think unconsciously, "I'm not crap, you're crap. I'm not failing, you're failing. I'm not unloved, you're unloved." Compensating, as a means of coping, brings to mind the words of Queen Gertrude in Shakespeare's Hamlet. "The lady doth protest too much, methinks." Some individuals can cope through what Lublin and Johnson refer to as dumping. Compensating, especially when we blame or frighten others, can sometimes take the form of dumping, i.e., dumping your stuff on others. Compensating, avoidance, and submitting are probably rooted in human evolution. All animals will fight, take flight, or freeze when feeling threatened. Fighting is related to compensating. Flight, running away, is related to avoidance, and freezing is related to submission. These can all be good defenses when we are genuinely threatened, but unhelpful when the reaction is trauma based. Bessel van der Kolk uses different language, but he too is describing these three ways of coping. He uses the terms disengaged shutdown, equivalent to avoidance, subservient compliance, equivalent to submitting, and angry defiance, equivalent to compensation. These three coping responses seemed hardwired into us, but you can use whatever language works best. Exercise 1. Your reflections on avoiding, submitting, and compensating. It's possible you cope through avoiding, submitting, or compensating at different times, but perhaps you can identify with one of these styles more than the others. What are your thoughts about how these styles operate in your life? Please pause the audio and complete exercise 1 in the guidebook. What's the point of dealing with traumatic core beliefs? What's the point of managing your core beliefs? For us, the point relates to something we've explored in different ways and at different times during this program. Historical trauma and neglect mean that as a child you did not get your needs met sufficiently for safety, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-expression, and meaning. Child abuse and neglect produce traumatic core beliefs, and these core beliefs can prevent an individual from getting these important needs met as an adult. Core beliefs, when triggered today, can sap an individual's confidence, induce unhelpful levels of anxiety and mistrust, and instigate feelings of being unwanted or unloved. Core beliefs can also be the driving force behind experiences that re-traumatize individuals today. The point of dealing with core beliefs skillfully is this: managing or even healing core beliefs gives you a better chance of getting your needs met for safety, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-expression, and meaning. A core belief triggered, mapping out the experience. Below is a map which describes what usually happens when a core belief gets triggered. Having the map below with you or in your head can be a good resource in case a core belief gets triggered and you feel lost in terms of knowing how you want to deal with the situation. Please pause the audio and review the diagram entitled Lifespan of a Triggered Core Belief. You will also want to be able to view this map while listening to the remainder of this section. Let's walk through the map above, allowing the experience of Margaret to act as a guide. Margaret is a singer and guitarist. She was asked to audition for a band which consisted of 4 other musicians, all of whom were men she didn't know. Margaret had experienced multiple forms of abuse as well as emotional neglect throughout childhood. She also experienced re-traumatization as an adult, which included physical abuse from previous partners, one of whom was a musician. Today, she is in a relationship with a man who does not harm her, but she still finds it hard to tell him how frightened she can get in certain situations or ask him for help. Considering the map above, Margaret had an opportunity to audition with the band. This was the trigger. A powerful core belief, people will harm me, was activated. Simultaneously, Margaret experienced fear and strong physical responses such as a pounding heart, shallow breathing, and feeling shaky. This was the emotional and physical response. Whenever she imagined auditioning with the 4 male band members, she'd think, they are going to hurt me. And she had images of getting emotionally abused, humiliated, and even physically or sexually assaulted. These were the automatic negative thoughts. She canceled one audition date, explaining that she had a throat infection. This was unhelpful coping in the form of avoidance. She felt awful about herself for canceling, which likely triggered another core belief: I'm inadequate or unacceptable. Margaret's experience clearly illustrates how past trauma creates a core belief that, when triggered, can generate all sorts of problems and make it difficult to meet needs. The one bit of the map we have not illustrated through Margaret's story relates to needs based coping. The rest of this chapter focuses on those skills which support needs based coping. And before we finish, we will return to Margaret and see what needs based coping looked like for her. Needs based coping. Unhelpful coping, often in the form of avoidance, compensating, or submitting, tends to keep core beliefs powerful and results in unmet needs. Needs based coping, as we are defining it, are ways in which an individual thinks or behaves, which leads to needs getting met. And needs based coping will also weaken traumatic core beliefs. What represents needs based coping will depend greatly on the situation or trigger and the individual's present needs. There are several skills we can discuss that can support needs based coping, but you will need to do some creative thinking regarding how you apply any skills to a particular situation. Here is a simple way to know whether your response to any core belief represents unhelpful coping or skilled needs based coping. If the way you think and act in response to a core belief means that you and others don't get important needs met, that's unhelpful coping. If the way you respond when a core belief gets triggered results in you and others getting important needs met, that's needs based coping. It sounds simple on paper, but only makes real sense when observing your core beliefs and coping through real life circumstances. Observing your reactions, the primary skill. As a prelude to discussing skills for needs based coping, it's useful to consider what we have control over. To be fair, there is much we have little or no direct control over. For example, whether our partner or friend will be in a good mood, the traffic, whether the bus will show up on time, the government, the weather, the genetics we were handed at birth, the economy, and so on. And we often don't have much control over when or how our trauma based core beliefs will get triggered. However, we all have some direct control over three areas of ourselves. One, the choices we make and our behavior. Two, our thoughts. Three, our body. Observing your reactions to events is the most primary skill. This was the focus of the last chapter, and you looked at this in depth when we discussed the observing self in a previous chapter. When core beliefs get triggered, it's not theoretical, it's personal. The automatic negative thoughts, emotions, and impulses which follow can be powerful. In such a state, individuals can be so close to their experience that it's difficult to imagine they can direct their thoughts or actions. The key is to get some distance from what you are experiencing, to observe it. The previous chapter covering mindfulness can be useful in this respect. If, for a moment, you can look at what you are experiencing as interesting news rather than the truth or a crisis, you have created some distance from the reaction. Recall our earlier suggestion that being driven by your emotional reaction is like being inside a washing machine. Observing your reaction is like being outside the washing machine and watching what's going on through the glass window. It's not easy because when your core beliefs get triggered, you are likely to get whacked by powerful emotions and impulses, making it difficult to step back from your experience. You have to be able to slow down. Slowing down, stepping back, and observing your experience is the basis for all other skills. So, what is it you are observing? You can observe and identify what is triggering the reaction. You can also observe automatic negative thoughts and painful emotions or physical reactions. You can identify the core belief or beliefs you imagine are driving everything. These aspects of your experience will sound familiar because they were what you observed in the exercise from the previous chapter. In addition, you can observe impulses to cope in ways that are unlikely to help you meet your real needs, such as avoiding, submitting, and compensating. The other thing you can get in touch with when you get triggered is your needs. We are not talking about what you need in general, but what you need right now in any situation where a core belief is getting triggered. Those who experienced childhood harm often struggle to know what they really need in any particular situation. What you need in any situation is something only you can understand, but Abraham Maslow, discussed earlier in the program, gave us a good guide to universal human needs. What you need when a core belief is triggered is very likely a particular expression of the core human needs Maslow identified. The list of universal needs below is a slight modification of what Maslow said, but is true to his intentions. 1. Safety. This can mean emotional, physical, or material safety. 2. Belonging, or love, connection, intimacy, affection, friendship, community. 3. Self-esteem, or self-worth, self-respect, confidence. 4. Meaning, or self-expression, creativity, personal development, industry. You can't know how you want to think about a situation or how you want to respond to a situation unless you know what you need. And what you really need might be different than the apparent needs, which are driven by a traumatic core belief and powerful emotions kicked off by the survival brain. John, a person who experienced multiple episodes of abandonment in childhood, can help us distinguish apparent needs from real or deeper needs. He had checked Facebook and discovered that there had been a party that he'd not known about. He felt really angry, and his immediate impulse was to defriend several people he knew on Facebook. He even felt a wish to smear the guy he imagined was mainly at fault on social media. On the face of it, he needed revenge and was likely to cope by trying to get it. This would be compensating. But when he could slow down and think it through, with help from his sister, he could see that his needs for belonging and self-esteem had been badly dented. Being in touch with these deeper needs puts him in a position to respond that makes it more likely these needs would get met. This was fortunate because when he talked to a friend, he discovered he'd been invited to the party through an email that had ended up in a spam folder. To summarize, when you are in the grip of a core belief and the resulting painful feelings and impulses, stepping back from the reaction is essential. It's the basis for gaining control, and feeling a sense of control is vital. Control is what you didn't feel when you were a child, and probably later in life. So, what is important to observe is 1. The trigger. What happened to set this reaction off? 2. My reaction. For example, emotions, physical sensations, impulses, automatic negative thoughts. 3. Traumatic core beliefs driving this reaction. And 4. My real need or needs in this situation. If this seems like a lot of information to keep in mind, don't worry. At the end of this chapter, we offer another journal that pulls many of these ideas together and helps you apply them to real life circumstances. Skills for needs-based coping. Below we describe some of the needs-based coping skills that we have seen work well for many individuals, but it's important to note that this is not a comprehensive list. The situations people find themselves in are so unique and varied that we couldn't possibly list every skill that may be helpful. So we encourage you to be creative in discovering other healthy ways of responding to triggers. So, you've been triggered. You're experiencing painful emotions. You have some idea of the unhelpful coping you might fall into, avoiding, submitting, compensating, and you have accessed what you need. What can you do? Challenging or reframing automatic negative thoughts. Core beliefs and the negative automatic thoughts they spawn often represent highly biased ways of looking at yourself, others, and the world. Have you ever found yourself with someone who is bullying you? Someone who is saying things that are hurtful, untrue, and unhelpful? It's important to stand up to this person and set them straight, or get away from them. Core beliefs and the negative automatic thoughts they engender are like bullies that need challenging because they are frightening or discouraging you. Sharon was a young woman who experienced childhood physical and emotional abuse. She gave us a memorable example of challenging negative thoughts that resulted from a core belief. Sharon had left a new and expensive mobile phone on a bus, and when she called the bus company, the phone could not be found. She raged against herself and her stupidity for hours that evening, calling herself every name she could think of. She was in so much emotional pain that she started drinking vodka, and then had impulses to self harm. While literally holding a knife in her hand, she recalled the therapy she was doing. Losing her mobile phone, that was the trigger, had elicited an I'm inadequate or unacceptable core belief, and she was directing a whole range of horrible automatic thoughts at herself, such as I'm useless and stupid. At that moment, she accessed what she needed. The lost phone and her reaction had seriously dented her self esteem. She needed to get things into perspective, to repair the damage to her self esteem. She put the knife down and challenged automatic negative thoughts resulting from the core belief. Quote, leaving my mobile phone on the bus was a silly thing to do, and I should be more careful, but it doesn't mean I'm useless and a waste of space. It's just one mistake, and a phone can get replaced. I'm doing better now in a lot of ways. I've stopped using drugs, and I'm doing well on my course. End quote. Sharon caught herself before falling into unhelpful coping, getting drunker and self harming, which would have been a means of avoiding feelings. She was able to challenge and reframe the negative thoughts, and she felt better about herself, which she needed in this situation. Challenging thoughts means directly standing up to them. Reframing means looking at things differently. She did both. Challenging and reframing is something many people have to force themselves to do for a while because it's so natural to experience automatic negative thoughts as the truth. Challenging and reframing can work well as a means of responding to negative thoughts elicited by any of the core beliefs. Ask for help. Many people who experienced childhood harm find this extremely difficult to do. The reason is that in order to ask for help, you have to show somebody that you need help. Being abused or neglected taught a lot of people that they should never show vulnerability or rely on anyone because that would be dangerous. The problem is that everyone has to rely on others at various times for practical and emotional reasons, which means being able to show your needs, even vulnerability, and ask for help. Challenging core beliefs or thoughts is something you do for yourself, but sometimes we cannot get our needs met on our own, and we have to ask for help. Jonathan came from a chaotic family and spent time in the care system. Whenever his wife left for her night shift, he felt agitation and an unreasonable anger. He felt as though he was being abandoned again, and he'd convinced himself that his wife didn't care about him. The core belief was, people will neglect or abandon me. Sometimes skills such as challenging core beliefs or self soothing could work for Jonathan, but sometimes there was just no way he could get his needs met on his own. What did he need at such times? He needed emotional safety, belonging, and connection. Sometimes he coped with his fears by getting angry with his wife, which would be compensating, but this would push her away. With encouragement from his therapist, Jonathan began explaining his background and vulnerabilities to his wife, which allowed him to occasionally ask for reassurance from his wife in ways which didn't interfere with her work. Graded exposure. Graded exposure is one of those terms that sounds perfectly normal to clinicians but ridiculous, or even rude, to the general public. However, graded exposure can be a powerful skill for responding to triggered core beliefs and difficult emotions, especially anxiety. Anxiety or fear is a common problem for many people who experienced childhood harm. These individuals had genuine reasons to be afraid when they were young, and many had reasons to feel afraid later in life, especially if they were re-traumatized. Graded exposure simply means breaking down a feared situation into steps that can be taken, one at a time. In other words, you are exposing yourself to what is feared, but doing it in a graded or step-by-step fashion. Kevin was physically and emotionally abused by his father, sexually abused by a neighbor, and bullied at school. Now in his mid-30s, he has a wife and two children and works as a painter-decorator. All things considered, he seemed to be doing well until two events conspired to throw him into an anxious depression. His father died, and shortly after he, by chance, saw the man who had sexually abused him. He had a couple of panic attacks, lost confidence, took sickness absence from work, and didn't leave the house for 2 weeks. For Kevin, recent events had activated core beliefs such as people will harm you and life is unsafe and something bad will happen. And he had fallen into avoidance as a way of trying to stay safe. He needed to feel safe again, reconnect with people, and get back to doing what felt meaningful to him. With help from a therapist, Kevin created a list of places and people, starting with more manageable ones and working up to those that were really frightening. Visiting his mother, going to the library, going out bicycling, seeing a friend, shopping at Tesco's, high street shopping, going to the mall, and finally, returning to work. He felt anxious at every step, but being able to manage each situation gave him the confidence to deal with the next one. That was how graded exposure worked for Kevin, but it needs to be applied differently for each person who may benefit from it. It can be a good strategy, especially for core beliefs such as people will harm you, life is unsafe and something bad will happen, or I can't cope, I will fail, and life is pointless. The power of the word stop. The automatic thoughts, which are driven by a core belief, can be really persistent, even when you can identify them as unrealistic, trauma based, or out of proportion to any real threats. These distressing thoughts can keep popping into your head. If it's hard to think about anything else, we can probably say you are obsessing. You want to get on with your life, but the disturbing thoughts won't leave you alone. What can you do if you recognize that the thoughts are trauma based, over the top, and getting in the way of your happiness? You can face the thoughts and say, stop. Say it out loud or in your head. If you wish, you can also visualize a stop sign. Does this technique sound too simplistic to be useful? Not for a lot of traumatized people we've known. You met Marcia before, a woman who had been physically and emotionally abused by her father. She'd sent a WhatsApp message to 4 friends the day before suggesting a social get together, and no one had yet replied. Quote, I'm trying to do the simplest things: clean the house, pick my son up from school, sort the bills. I just keep thinking, what a bunch of assholes my friends are. And I'm having fantasies of getting a bunch of new friends, and then I tripped on the rug and banged my knee. I was on the floor crying, and that's when I remembered about just saying stop. The thoughts kept coming, but I'd say stop each time and try to focus. It didn't stop the thoughts from coming, but having a way of responding made me feel I had a little more control. End quote. The core belief mainly being triggered was people will neglect or abandon me, and her coping style was to surrender to the core belief. The stop technique gave Marcia enough space to access her learning brain. We felt she responded in quite a skilled way. She sent another message to her friends, one which was humorous but made a point. Hey gals, did you get my message from yesterday, or have you all been kidnapped? What's up? Her friends started responding, and most of them had just been busy at the time she'd sent the message. Past trauma often works like this. Our body and brain experience the present as if it were the past. It often does this by spitting out a stream of automatic negative thoughts which are driven by a core belief. Saying stop is a way of helping your brain and body understand that the danger is over. Breathe and relax. If an event triggers emotions such as fear or anger, your body will react by pumping more oxygen and constricting muscles. Your neurology is preparing you to fight, compensating, run, avoidance, or freeze, submit. This is fine if you or someone else is genuinely in immediate danger. However, it's possible that a pounding heart, muscle tension, and rapid or shallow breathing are responses to a core belief having been triggered. If this is the case, what you need now is reassurance and the feeling of safety. As discussed previously, you can directly get control by slowing and deepening your breathing. Don't let them win. This isn't a skill, exactly. It's more of a perspective, but it's one we think must have validity because it has been suggested by several people we have worked with. Martine voiced this perspective while talking about her stepfather, a man who sexually and emotionally abused her between the ages of 7 and 13. Quote, sometimes I get so angry thinking about what he did and what a mess my life has been. I can get crazy with it, and then I don't sleep, and I can be horrible to Steve, her partner, and my friends. But then I think, he, expletive, ruined my childhood. He's not going to ruin the rest of my life. I'm not going to let him win. End quote. Anger can be destructive, whether it's a storm inside an individual's head or expressed outward at others or the world. Martine seemed to be channeling her anger at her stepfather constructively. It was coming out as a stubborn refusal to allow the effects of her stepfather's abuse to ruin her life. If all else fails. Sometimes the anger, frustration, or despondency might seem so powerful that many of the skills mentioned previously will seem wholly inadequate. More likely, in the grip of a really powerful core belief, many people will lose contact entirely with skills that can help at other times. If you're getting overwhelmed, perhaps all we can suggest is to stay in the moment and do the next thing. States of consciousness are just that. They are states. They change. If your anger is driving homicidal fantasies or your despair is driving suicidal impulses, perhaps remind yourself that this state of consciousness will change. A horrible state of consciousness is immobilizing and separates you from life and other people. So see if you can reassure yourself that this can't last. Stay in the moment and do the next thing. And until it passes, try not to make it worse. Most people have enough experience of making things worse to know what we are talking about. Drugs or alcohol, picking a fight, self-harming, and so on. See if you can avoid making it worse until this crap storm of a state of consciousness blows itself out. And if you do fall into ways of coping which make it worse, see if you can learn from it, rather than punishing yourself. What's important is making progress, not pursuing perfection. Making progress usually involves a lot of missteps. You're not a failure. You just got sideswiped by a very powerful trigger and a persistent core belief. Exercise 2. Skills for needs-based coping. The skills suggested here include challenging or reframing automatic thoughts, asking for help, graded exposure, breathe and relax, interrupting trauma-based obsessions with the word stop, don't let them win, and stay in the moment and do the next thing. Which of these skills seem potentially helpful for you to develop? Are there other skills not mentioned here you think can be helpful? Please pause the audio and do some journaling with exercise 2 in the guidebook. Responding to core beliefs through journaling. The journal you used in the last chapter was designed to help you identify triggers, reactions, and core beliefs. There is a blank journal for you to use at the end of this chapter, which does this, but also encourages you to discover and apply needs-based skills. As an illustration, below is a version of this journal that was completed by Marguerite, who we mentioned earlier in this chapter. If you recall, Marguerite experienced multiple forms of childhood abuse and was frightened to audition for a promising band. She'd experienced re-traumatization as an adult from men that was compounding experiences of childhood abuse. Marguerite's use of the journal was very specific to her situation, core beliefs, and patterns of coping. Your journaling will be unique. Please examine Marguerite's journal entry below to support your understanding of how to use the journal. Please pause the audio and review Marguerite's journal in the guidebook. When a core belief is triggered, individuals often have thoughts and feelings that are heavily biased. Marguerite was very sure these musicians were going to harm her, and her fear was really out of proportion to any actual threat. She used a combination of needs-based skills to help her manage the emotional reaction to resist falling into further avoidance as a way of coping. She challenged the core belief and automatic thoughts, focused on her breathing to reduce the anxiety response, told her partner what she was experiencing, and asked for his help. The way in which her partner supported her was also a form of graded exposure. It was a step on the way to being able to audition with no support. She still felt fear, but her skilled response to core beliefs helped her face the situation. She wasn't chosen as a band singer, but was asked to sing backup vocals for recording sessions. In this situation, standing up to core beliefs helped her get needs met for safety, self esteem, and meaning or self expression. The way Marguerite coped and her use of the journal is useful as an illustration, but it's a fairly ideal illustration. In practice, it can be messier and more confusing, especially when someone is new to journaling. Journaling can be a powerful way to develop insight, but it can take some experience to feel confident about it. Exercise 3: Journaling your experiences. The best way to develop your skills for dealing with core beliefs and getting your needs met is to practice in relation to the natural events arising in your life. You probably won't have to wait long for a core belief to get triggered. The journal below allows you to track everything discussed in this and the previous chapter. Here are a few suggestions. 1. Keep in mind that the clearest indication that a core belief has been triggered is the experience of strong feelings, physical sensations, or impulses. Fill in the journal as soon as possible. Making copies of the journal you can keep with you is often helpful. Also, it may make sense to fill in the journal from left to right, but you can do it in whatever order is most helpful. 2. The page following the journal offers additional information that has helped many people reflect on their experiences and fill in the various parts of the journal. 3. Keep in mind that the needs-based skills discussed in this chapter may or may not be what is going to help you in any situation. You may have to do some creative thinking or talk it through with others. If you feel you need help with any particular column, try and speak with anyone you trust. 4. The more situations you journal, the more experience you will gain. When individuals have journaled several experiences, they inevitably see patterns developing. Reoccurring themes can include triggers, certain core beliefs, unhelpful coping impulses, and particular needs. Seeing these patterns offers opportunities for increasing insight, and the purpose of using the journal is to help you internalize your capacity for observing and coping with core beliefs and other reactions. With enough practice, individuals don't need to actually use the journal. Please pause the audio and review the journal at the end of the chapter in the guidebook. This concludes the audio for the chapter on traumatic core beliefs, taking control.